The fate of the Affordable Care Act is now in the Supreme Court after the court heard arguments on the case today. The case, California versus Texas, challenges the constitutionality of the individual mandate, which requires Americans purchase health insurance. If the law is struck down, millions of Americans could lose health care coverage in the midst of this pandemic. But during the arguments today, two conservative justices indicated they may support the act, making it seem likely it would stay in place. For more on this, I want to bring in Alan Jenkins. He's a professor of practice at Harvard Law School. Professor Jenkins, welcome. Great to have you with us. So can you break down what we heard from the arguments today?
Well, thanks for having me, Tanya. Just as a reminder for viewers, there are three different questions packed into this case. One is, do the states and the individuals who are challenging the individual mandate have standing, meaning can they show that they might actually be injured by the law if it's that they claim is unconstitutional? The second is about the constitutionality of the mandate now that Congress in 2017 eliminated the tax penalty associated with that. That's what saved it. When it came before the Affordable Care Act came before the Supreme Court several years ago. And then the third question, which in some ways is the most important one, is if that mandate is unconstitutional, does that wipe out the entire act?
And so do each of those 3 points that you just laid out have to be litigated separately or all in one piece?
So they were all argued today. They're all presented in the briefs, and the court asked questions about all of them for over an hour today.
Interesting. Okay, so the Supreme Court has upheld Obamacare's individual mandate before, but of course there are now more conservative justices. How do we expect this to play out? I didn't think that the same question could come, in front of the court again. Is it because it is simply a slightly different question this time around?
It is slightly different. So there are new justices, but the reason it's come back is that the last time the individual mandate came before the Supreme Court, a five-member majority of the court said that it was constitutional, but only because there was a tax penalty involved. And so, for fairly complex constitutional reasons, the court found that Congress has the power under its tax authority to impose this kind of mandate, but not under other parts of the Constitution, including the Commerce Clause. But subsequently, in 2017, Congress zeroed out that tax penalty. So they eliminated at least from a dollar standpoint, the one thing that 5 members of the court found saved its constitutionality. And so several states and states' attorneys general immediately challenged the constitutionality of that provision again. And so now we're back in court considering whether, given those changed circumstances, the act is still constitutional. And if it's not, what are the implications of that?
And will the court then decide that, or that's a separate question? In other words, if they strike that down, who decides what happens to the law overall?
Right. So the court's going to decide all of it. So first, as I said, they'll decide, is there standing? Should we be considering this question at all? There was actually some skepticism from a number of justices, maybe 5, about whether there's any actual injury here to these states or to the individuals who are challenging the act. The court, both, as a constitutional matter, doesn't get involved in theoretical disputes. They want to know that the people challenging the constitutionality of a law actually are being harmed by the law. And they may well find that in this case, that standard's not met, in which case the entire challenge goes away and the constitutionality of the act stands for now. I think it's also quite possible that they will consider the constitutionality of the mandate. And if they find, Tanya, that this mandate is not constitutional, then in this same case, right, and in the same opinion, they will go on to consider, well, does that mean the entire Affordable Care Act is wiped out, including the protections for people with pre-existing conditions, the requirements that people be covered, or is it just that provision that they're going to find is invalid?
I see. And so as a very practical matter, if the law is struck down, what would happen to the millions of people who currently have health care coverage under this act?
So if they strike down that mandate and they find that the entire Affordable Care Act is invalid, tens of millions of Americans are going to be immediately and in the middle of a pandemic without coverage. It's going to be significant turmoil, and this was something that was discussed at some length in the oral argument. There's going to be economic turmoil. There are going to be tens of millions of people whose health is immediately at risk and who have no health care coverage. It's going to be quite problematic for lots and lots of people. We don't yet know what the court's going to decide, and it will be at least several months before they decide, and maybe even the summer. But if they wipe out the entire ACA, there's going to be a lot of harm to a lot of Americans.
And so how soon can we expect to have a decision about this case? And if you were to sort of read the tea leaves here and, look at what certain justices have indicated, what's your guess on how the court might rule on this?
Well, it's always extremely risky to guess based on oral argument how a case is going to come out. In your first question, they can decide this case anytime after this Friday, but I suspect that, it will be several months at least, till the spring. It might even be one of the last cases that they announce at the end of the term, which is traditionally around July 1st. If they resolve it on that standing question, in other words, they find that the case goes away because no one's actually injured, we're going to hear a little bit earlier. And so in terms of likely outcome, it's very difficult to know. I do think there is a significant possibility that they will find no standing, that they will find that the case is not properly before them, and it will go away. I'm reluctant to say that that's the most likely outcome, but I think it's quite possible. And I think they are mixed in some non-traditional ways about the implications of what should happen if this mandate is struck down. I think there were indications from some justices, including Justice Kavanaugh, for example, that the rest of the act should remain and that would be a normal thing to do. And there was some skepticism from others.
Well, Professor Alan Jenkins, thank you so much for joining us. This is surely a case that all Americans will be watching very closely. Thank you.
Thank you.